Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Some of you are seeing this on a DVD, some on a VHS, and some are reading the book. But I thought before we get into the book, I'd take just a moment. Some of you don't even know who I am. But I had a very important part of your history. You see, years ago, there was a man named Bill Clinton. He was running for president. I'm the guy that brought out the Gennifer Flowers story, the Paula Jones, Whitewater, and story after story. I did a video. The video that I guess now is somewhat famous, the Clinton Chronicles. And when I did that video, there was no other way to get the truth out about what was going on. The real Bill Clinton. Most of you, at that time, believed only what the mainstream press told you. I remember very well sitting in the Holiday Inn Hotel the night of the Super Bowl when I was there with David Lee Miller and a camera crew from a group called Hard Copy, a TV magazine. And we were to watch Bill and Hillary come on and deny that he had an affair with Gennifer Flowers. Quite a night. Bill Hillary came on, had millions and millions and millions of viewers. And after the program, David Lee Miller interviewed me and said, well, what do you think about their presentation? What do you think about what they said? And in case you don't remember, that was the infamous night that Hillary said she's not just going to stand by her man person and baking chocolate chip cookies, but that Bill did not have an affair with Gennifer. Well, history has shown that that night, two people told a story. One was me, the other were the Clintons. And it turned out that I was telling the truth. And that's the purpose of this book, DVD, VHS, whatever you're seeing. You see, since that time, the things that I said on the Clinton Chronicles, and most of you can go back, dust off your copy and view it. Look at what I said. Look what turned out to be true historically. Look who lied and look who didn't. But then we're here today. Why don't I do another Clinton Chronicles? Hillary's fixing to run for the presidency. By all things that I know, she'll win unless we stop her. But you see, something happened after the Clinton Chronicles. Most of you know what has come. Fahrenheit 9/11. Other videos. Michael Moore. You see, we didn't have the media back then. We didn't even have Hollywood back then. But the video made such an impact on the Clinton administration and things that came during his administration. And it made a little history. And so along comes a guy like Michael Moore. And he makes a video about now President Bush trying to affect Bush's reelection bid. And when I was thinking about doing this, I said, how am I going to do it? Well, you know, I cannot compete with the Michael Moores. I can't compete with the Hollywood productions and how they can cut and edit things and make things say what they really didn't say. So I chose to do it this way. You're hearing me. Some of you are watching me. And I'm dictating this book right now. There will be no edits. There'll be no fancy cuts and bells and whistles that make you marvel at the production. It'll be me and you. Those of you that can see it on a DVD, VHS, I'm looking right into your eyes and you're looking into mine. Something is wrong. Something's wrong with our government. It's serious. The Clintons, well, you say, well, the Clintons are coming back. Hillary's coming back. Well, that's not the problem. It's deeper than that. Yes, she's coming back. Yes, there are going to be things coming up in the near future that you can't even imagine. But it stems from a problem as basic, as down to the core as who we are. So Michael Moore, look in my eyes, read my lips. If you believe as much in the things that you say as do I, then let's see you without a net. There are no scripts. I don't have a script anywhere in this room. I don't have some makeup artist. I don't have some cameraman floating around. Michael Moore, let's see you level with the American people. Let's see you back up historically the things that you've said in the past. You know, I come with my hat in my hand. A lot of people have forgotten, never even saw the Clinton Chronicles. But I will give you this. There is a difference today versus then. You see, back then, not a soul in this country knew who I was. No way they were ever going to know my story. And then when I told it, millions and millions of dollars were spent to cover up the things that I said. Many a congressional hearing was conducted over issues that I brought up. Issues that would have just gone away like the wind had I not found this incredible vehicle called talk radio. But I talked, and I talked, and you listened, and you heard, and you judged me very critically. During that day, nobody had ever said the things that I said about a sitting president of the United States and all the honor that goes with that office. Many of you call me names. But you know what? I warned you. I told you what he would do. I told you what his administration would be, what it would be all about, and in the end, how it would end up. And that, I believe, historically, has proven to be true. Oh, Hillary wrote a big book, Living History. I find that kind of clever, considering everything that she put in that book had nothing to do with the real history. It was a fairy tale. But then again, she had all the power, all the money, the big publishers. And her story was told in her creative manner that she told it. Understand, of course, she didn't even write it. She used a ghostwriter. Well, if you're going to make stuff up, why not hire the best ghostwriter? If you're going to come up with fairy tales, get you a good one. Well, that's why I'm doing this book this way. Ain't no ghostwriters here. There's nobody behind me that you can't see. I'm sitting in my home telling you my story. But what you're going to learn as we get into this book, you're going to learn that my story is your story. You know, ain't nobody clean. Nobody's clean. Today, we hear about the Bush administration getting us into war. that everybody claims was all fake, that they had trumped up stuff to get us in it. We hear today that people in this administration outed a CIA agent that was 100% involved in getting her husband to try to tell the truth about the war in Iraq. Well, let me tell you, what you're going to learn in this book is the truth. And you say, well, can you prove it? Well, this is an interesting proposition I make to all of you. History will judge whether I'm telling you the truth or not. Some will be past history, and some in the future. But I expose myself right now. Some of the things that I will say will be deemed by those that don't want this story out to be criminally libelous. And if I can't prove it, I get to go to jail the rest of my life. So you see, I think the stakes are clearly stated. I think my ambitions will be clearly revealed before this book is through. I seek no public office. I seek no fame. Missed that part called fortune. But I owe this country something. Something that many of you will never understand. I took an oath years ago. It wasn't a big thing. But it was just an oath that said, I swear to protect this nation from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Many of you took that same oath. Have you forgotten it? Was it not really an oath? Was it just words you said? Or did it mean something? So as we pursue the things we're going to talk about in this book, I lead you to this. When you read this, weigh the cost if I'm right versus the cost if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, you can call me a fool. But if I'm right, look around at your children. Look at your grandchildren. Have we totally lost the ability to believe in something so much and love something so much that we would fight to protect and defend it? Well, folks, this is my story. This is your story. And I'm sorry some of you are going to take personal offense, because my first chapter is all about ain't nobody clean. And when I say nobody, I mean nobody. I hope you enjoy the book. But if you're reading it for entertainment purposes only, I wish you would lay it down and never read a page, never look at one thing I say. The things I'm going to tell you, the history I'm going to give you, is all about us, our government, we the people, and where we've all gone wrong. Now, I know you think, what a peculiar title for a chapter. But folks, it's just the truth. Ain't nobody clean when it comes to your government. Ain't nobody clean when it comes to each and every one of us. You see, when it comes to politics, there's a rule. Never forget it, and above all, never deny it. Everybody has a price or something to hide. And that's the rule that controls your government today. You see, It started back in the Revolutionary War. And everybody has all of these great memories of what we read in high school about the Revolutionary War and the people that were involved. But if you go back and look at the Revolutionary War and look at what caused it, you'll find it was people that had a vested interest. Yes, they wanted to get away from the mean old king. And yes, they had a better dream of a future. But everybody involved, even down to and including our Constitution, everybody in the war and in our Constitution, they weren't clean. Their thoughts weren't pure. You say, well, how can you say that? Well, because our Constitution was drawn up. We won the war. But we won the war with somewhere between 4 and 10% of the people in this country actually being involved. So that means at least 90% benefited from the sacrifice of a few. And then we went on. And the Constitution excluded certain people. Blacks. Blacks were not considered free men with our Constitution. So when we declared that everybody was equal, well, that was except blacks. Time passed on. And then our government, our country, saw the necessity of eliminating an entire race of people, the American Indian, just so that we could expand, so that we could grow. And then we had the Great Civil War. The Great Civil War fought for the purest of reasons. History shows it wasn't quite that pure. It was a slaughter of Americans. And then from World War I to World War II to Korea to Vietnam. See, we're not clean in Vietnam. It was started, as history will tell you, over the Gulf of Tonkin. Well, here, 50 years later, we find out that there were no torpedoes shot at our ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. We find out today that it was a war over the great industrial complex, the people that made munitions. Of course, they couldn't keep building weapons because we didn't need any more. We weren't fighting anybody. So we needed a war so we'd use up the munitions so they could make more. Why has it always got to be that we have to wait 50, 100 years until the real truth can come out? I bring us forward to today. Many of you are for the war in Iraq. Many of you are against it. Those that are for it believe that we've gone for the greatest of good, the greatest of purposes, so it's just. And those of you that don't like it, well, you think we were lied to just to get us in it. And that it's all about oil. And that brings me to this chapter. Ain't nobody clean. You see, the story that will be told in the future about the war in Iraq will sparsely resemble what we envisioned in our minds today, either side. Let me say at the onset, my description of history and this war in Iraq has to do with something greater than any one of us. You see, I love the soldier. I believe when we start looking at this country and the fact that we're not clean anymore, is the fact that we don't have patriots anymore. and the last vestige of patriotism left on this planet for we, the people of these United States of America, exists in our young soldiers. People who heard a call, rightly or wrongly, and believed in this country so much that they volunteered to go to a foreign land and to fight an enemy and possibly die just to pursue the greatness of this nation. We're not clean. There were no weapons of mass destruction, we're told. Well, folks, let me set that one straight for you. There were weapons of mass destruction. There was all kind of chemical agents, biological agents. Saddam Hussein had them. Well, Larry, it's funny you can say that, but according to CNN, CBS, they just didn't exist, folks. They existed. And it's because we're not clean that I know they existed. You see, there was once upon a time a nation called Iran. And we loved Iran. It became America West. I mean, it was the greatest, Middle East, not West, it was the greatest proof that American values were spreading. And there was a Shah that was loyal to this country. And we armed him with our latest weapons to make sure he could defend himself. And then all of a sudden one day, radical Islamic fundamentalist ousted him, ran him out, took our embassy hostage. And then something happened. This Ayatollah that took over Iran decided, well, I'll just go somewhere else. And we heard first about a war between Iran and Iraq. But the thing we had failed to understand was, we obviously sided with Iraq at that time. We needed a leader in Iraq that was ruthless, that would fight those Iranians. Hence came a guy named Saddam Hussein. Yes, in our interest of getting clean, you must know the truth. It was our government, our CIA, it was our interest that created Saddam Hussein. But Saddam Hussein had lots of people to fight, but he was up against an army that we had outfitted in Iran. And they had weapons that the Iraqis could not defend themselves against. Tanks, jets. So we send a man, albeit a reasonably young person back then, Donald Rumsfeld. And Donald Rumsfeld gives Iraq chemical and biological weapons to level the playing field. So when you hear somebody tell you that Hussein didn't have chemical biological weapons, they're lying. We know they're lying. We knew they were lying when they were saying it, because we can prove we gave them to him. And then you say, well, was that right? Well, was it wrong? Was it wrong to stop this rogue nation that had come in and run our guy, the Shah, out, taken over our embassy, and starting to spread radical Islamic beliefs throughout the region, a region by which we needed oil? Instead of telling the truth, folks, it was best just to deal with it. And we dealt with it. And this nation enjoyed oil from that day forward, and we had certain stops all along the way to protect us. Ain't nobody clean. Ain't nobody clean. We shouldn't have believed back then that which history had shown us would never hold. We should not have gotten involved with the Shah. We should have not loaded up any country in that region with Islamic beliefs at the root of those countries. We should never have loaded them up with space age at that time technology, because you know what? One day it could be used against others in that region. But we did. So that's the story of how Hussein got there. That's the story of how we knew there were biological and chemical weapons. And then over time, through many administrations, we knew Saddam Hussein wanted one other weapon: nuclear weapons. They all do. Every country in the region wanted them. To suppose otherwise of Hussein would have been foolish. And then the unbelievable happened. Saddam Hussein, with our help, with the technology we had advanced his military to stop him from being overrun by Iran, Saddam Hussein takes that technology, and of course with a little bit of help from Russia, the Soviet Union. He took that technology, and what does he do? He invades Kuwait. Oh, here's where we really start getting dirty. We say Hussein's invading Kuwait. He can't do that. We can't let one nation invade another. What we meant was, if Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait and Kuwait didn't have any oil, we wouldn't have cared. We don't care in countries in Africa. We say we do, but we don't. When one group invades another, one group does this, that, or the other. We have to have the oil in the Middle East. And Kuwait happens to be sitting on something. We happen to have spent a lot of money in Kuwait, major oil companies, developing that industry in that region. So we load up. We go and we run Hussein out, back into Iraq, inflict incredible damage to his military. It was a joke, but we did inflict damage to them, and they found out they didn't have quite the military they thought they did. But there were unintended consequences of that war that haunt us today and have caused part of the problem in Iraq. You see, when we ran him back into his country, we put sanctions on him. And it was those sanctions that stopped him from being able to build up his army. That was the purpose, right? Stop him from ever being able to outfit his army by the latest weapons from the Soviets and become a formidable foe. So we place an embargo on him. And that embargo facilitated only the sale of his oil, 25% to be exact, to go towards humanitarian purposes. Well, that's when things got a little kinky. You see, back before we went into Iraq with this war, I'm on public record saying, let me tell you why the UN is not backing us, why the Security Council's not backing us. People scoffed at me, laughed at me, and said, well, you can't know it. And I said, well, the problem was, the reason that Security Council is not going to endorse us going in and getting Hussein is because they were backhauling his oil. France, Germany, Russia, and this incredible new market for oil, China. They didn't want us to go into Iraq. Why would they want us to go to Iraq? Stop the good deal they had on oil. So they played a game. They set us up. They made President Bush have to wait and wait and wait 4 months before he could go on, even by ourselves, into Iraq. And folks, you want to know what happened to the weapons of mass destruction? It was during that 4 months that they left. They left. And you know what happened then? The oil companies decided, hey, this is the ticket. This is the ticket. Let's go into Iraq. Now, they didn't care about the oil reserves in Iraq. I mean, they did, but they didn't. What they wanted to do was stop somebody cutting into their market for oil in countries like China and Russia. So we go. The media, people say, well, we're going in and it's just for the oil. We know now, Cheney, Wolfowitz, going back to 91, the Gulf War, we know they were there with then President Bush, 41, Daddy Bush. We know that they wanted them to go on in, but we didn't. Because Daddy Bush honored the UN permission slip we had, which took us to the border of Iraq and stopped us. So you think. Ain't nobody clean. Daddy Bush's advisors said if we go into Iraq, we can defeat Hussein. But we can never control those people. The Sunnis, the Shias, the Kurds, they're going to fight amongst each other, and we're going to get caught in a quagmire with no end in sight. So Daddy Bush, with his history with the CIA, understood that, and he stopped right then. And it was that day that our fate of invading Iraq was sealed. That day. Not 4 months, not 6 months, not a year before we went into Iraq. It was that day in 91 that sealed our fate. Because that was the day that we tried to penalize Hussein. And in doing so, we penalized the oil companies. And they didn't want any part of that. Time passed. Even President Clinton, Bill Clinton, is lackadaisical, non-caring as he was. He listened to his advisors that said, you invade Iraq, you'll get it. But what you get when you get it ain't going to be what you want. But here came the new president, President Bush. And here came Wolfowitz and Cheney. And where the story gets muddled, where it gets confusing, is you've got Cheney and his crew thinking that they're just looking for a way into Iraq to conquer the oil problem. And folks, what happened then was 9/11. And the world changed. Not for necessarily the reasons you believe. You see, prior to 9/11, George Bush was president, but he was having trouble. He was having trouble hooking up, connecting with the American people. Economics wasn't particularly his subject. World affairs certainly wasn't particularly his subject. And the problem became for his handlers, what subject could he talk about with credibility? But then something happened when 9/11 hit. The terrorists, they believed that they could shock this country to its knees and make it capitulate. But in fact, what happened was the American people, nowhere America started putting out flags on their porches, and we became galvanized. George Bush went to New York, and on that faithful day that he stood there with the firemen, he found his voice of resolve, his voice of compassion, and he put his 6 guns on. And he said to those firemen, to those first responders, digging people up, they're members of their organizations that had died trying to save people. He said, we will get back at these people, and he declared war on terrorism. And then we started looking for where the terrorists were hiding. The biggest, most obvious place was Afghanistan. And we sent our troops in. And we got rid of the Taliban, the people that were harboring terrorists. But folks, that's the end. Then it changed. And then this problem with not being clean surfaced one more time. Except this time, it surfaced in a way that we thought we all knew, but you really don't know. So read on, view on. The next chapter is one country too far. We went just one country too far. And it's caused a chain of events that has set this nation on its end. A chain of events based off people with other concepts, people with reasons they want versus what's good for the nation. We saw the ultimate in not being clean. We saw special interests reach out and grab a moment in time and use it to their advantage. So stick around. We did go one country too far. In all of our history, we as Americans want to strive to be better, to be stronger, to do that thing that no other country could do. Maybe it's a symbol. Maybe it's a way we look at ourselves. But the problem is we don't always understand the realities to which our actions become involved, or the things that cause us to get involved. You see, after 9/11, President Bush, our Congress, the American people, we declared war on terrorism. And we set out to dislodge terrorists wherever they could be building up. Certainly Afghanistan was the keystone place. It was the foundation for terrorism of that day. We go in, we run them out, we deal a serious blow to terrorism in this world by stopping their overt training camps. But then something happened. Now, folks, there was a situation, and it started back when Bill Clinton was president. You see, many of you claim that 9/11 lays at the feet of President Bush. I have said for years now, it just can't be Bush's fault. By the time 9/11 occurred, the Bush administration could barely find the bathrooms in the White House, much less be in a position to stop or start or cause anything. It started back during an administration that some of you don't want to hear about. It started during the Clinton administration. Well, are you saying in this book, are you saying that Clinton wanted 9/11 to happen? No, not at all. You see, 9/11, like so many pivotal points in our history, came to pass because of a comedy of errors. You see, Bill Clinton had a problem. As we know from Lewinsky and other women, he had something to hide. And he was so concerned that the American people might accidentally find out his little fetishes, that he did everything he could to suppress intelligence, both in the FBI and the CIA, just so that nobody could find out what he was doing, who he was with. And there were other more sinister things than just who he slept with. It was where he received his funding. How did he keep coming out on top? And folks, that had to do with his connection to communist countries, to the mob, all things that just could never surface. So then he put a big stopgap up to our CIA, to our intelligence community. Don't believe me? Ask people that were in the intelligence community. It was in total state of disarray, except for one group. There was a group that was started by the Department of Defense, a data mining operation to be experimented with, called Able Danger. Now, this group accidentally found out that there were terrorists moving around. They had strong reason to believe something was up. So they did what any agency would do, or any group working for this country. They set out to make this information known, only to find out when they took it before the FBI that the FBI would not talk to them. The reasons given were that a guy named Atta, the main person in the 9/11 attack that they had pinpointed, they knew he was up to something and they wanted to talk to somebody. Atta was here legally. And so when they went to the FBI, or attempted to go to the FBI couldn't listen to him, could not talk to him. And you say, well, that communication breakdown, had it not have occurred, the FBI could have gone to Atta, maybe to two of the other people that they had pegged, and you know what might have happened? I can't say today that it would stop 9/11, but it would have certainly put a degree of difficulty in there that might have postponed it, might have caused some other outcome. But they were denied access, the FBI, to this data because of something that happened in Waco. You see, the Clinton administration had already been caught in Waco using the military. And under a law, posse comitatus, you can't do that. But they had already been caught, and they were just dancing to try to make it go away. And were they to allow the FBI to get information about someone here in this country legally, meaning the military was spying on them, was just unheard of. They couldn't allow it to happen. So the Able Danger Group, that might be the key to have preventing 9/11, was shut down. Couldn't get their information anywhere. And then it happened, 9/11. And then all of a sudden we hear about these committees looking into what happened in 9/11. But they wouldn't look at this evidence, primarily because the key player for the Clinton administration that blocked Able Danger from getting this information to the FBI was none other than Jamie Gorelick, a Clinton person. And then lo and behold, Jamie Gorelick is placed on the 9/11 commission. And then Jamie Gorelick, with loud protests from our Attorney General, Ashcroft. He said she cannot be there, but they didn't listen. She was there. And when it came time for the 9/11 Commission to review the Able Danger information, they were just blown off. So we had a 9/11. And then, in the twinkle of an eye, the people in the Bush administration saw that George Bush got his legs under him with this issue. He could speak about it. He could talk tough. That Texas swagger, that Texas attitude played perfect with the fight against terrorism. And so we enter a war. George Bush goes into war in Afghanistan. And then Cheney, Wolfowitz, the people that before they ever even set foot in the White House were trying to plot some way to get back at Hussein. And folks, not for the right reasons. Not for the wrong reasons you think, but not for the right reasons. You see, they're still suffering the sting of the sanctions put against Hussein. And the fact that major oil users are getting their oil somewhere else, and they couldn't touch it. So opportunity presented itself. And all of a sudden, things start happening. And the plot thickens. And as I say, it's a comedy of errors. You see, there's a guy named George Tenet, head of the CIA, pointed to, headed up the CIA for Bill Clinton. In the first few days of the Bush administration, I begged, I yelled, I screamed, get rid of Tenet. Because as was the situation of the day, anybody in a high-level seat with the Clintons has to swear a loyalty oath beyond belief to the Clintons and nobody else, or they don't get those seats, especially a seat like Tenet was holding, where he might have found out the Chinese, were giving Clinton money for campaigns, or that Clinton was screwing women that might have been set up by foreign governments, using that as an ability to blackmail the administration and therefore the American people. So I warned, I begged George Bush, get rid of George Tenet. But he didn't. And then, of course, 9/11 hit. And as anyone would have done, being in the president's shoes, in the midst of a major attack like that with the dramatic effect it had, maybe then was not the time to change the director of the CIA. Maybe George Bush felt we need to keep the CIA director in so we can at least maximize, without a total new shift in administration, the efforts and the abilities of the CIA. And that was a mistake. Because you see, George Tenet knew. He knew Cheney. He knew Wolfowitz. He knew the oil companies. They knew. Or he knew that they wanted those oil markets back. And all he had to do was throw a crumb, just a crumb, to that group, and they would take it. Well, as history will show, he threw the crumb. Bush got excited. Bush thinking, of course, this is true information, and we need to go. Old Cheney, he had been around the block a few times. Colin Powell, he had been around a few times. They even knew, and history will show, that they knew there was something not right with this information. Now, granted, they wanted to go and get Saddam. They wanted to shut off this oil profiteering by Hussein that was cutting them out of markets. But they didn't want to do it at the risk of looking like idiots. So they challenged Tenet, but with no avail. Then Bush goes and he says, hey, we've got all this evidence proving Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and is at least trying to develop them. He already shows a propensity to use them against neighboring countries, like he invaded Kuwait. All the components were there, folks. And he goes to the UN, and lo and behold, the UN balks. He goes to the Security Council. And the Security Council, which should have been eager to get in and right a wrong, balked. And that's when Iraq became a problem. Because you see, now we know the rest of the story. Just this past week, in the oil for food scandal, where people were getting vouchers for oil in exchange for favors and bribes and payoffs, just this last week we find out that over 2,200 members of the UN, 2,200, were involved in oil for food. So is it any wonder? Is it any surprise that they didn't want us going in? Is it any wonder that even if Hussein had missiles sitting on the launching pad to launch at this country, they didn't want us to go in? Because you know what? Cut them out of a good thing. And those member nations on the Security Council, yeah, there's your good group of people. They didn't want us to go in because they were backhauling oil at half the going rate. So they stalled us, knowing that they were doing something at that very time, that they were saying behind closed doors and back channels to Hussein, hey, I don't know if we can stop this guy. Bush, I think's coming. But if you'll let him, he's going to come in. But make sure he don't find any weapons of mass destruction. Make sure there's nothing there for him to find. And we'll get him. Thinking that's the way it would go. We'd go in, we take the country, but we don't find any weapons of mass destruction. And then a thing called the Oslo Accord would be used against us. We had no basis to invade that country. So they used the time that they delayed our attack to export, to get out of there, to clean up. And then we go. And when we go, in Colin Powell's own words nowadays, he knew early on that we'd gone one country too far. He knew. He had a feeling we weren't going to find the weapons of mass destruction. Cheney, Wolfowitz, all the neocons, they're saying, we're in there. We're shutting down his exporting of oil and cutting into the oil companies' markets. But there are no weapons of mass destruction to be found. So in the twinkle of an eye again, as history will recall it, a plan was devised at the White House. Well, no weapons of mass destruction, so let's just call it Iraqi freedom. And let's deal with it from that perspective. Hey, we're already in there. What are we going to do? And so then the war in Iraq, which set out to be another battle in the war against terrorism, became a war that we just go in and try to referee. When all the advisors, all the people for years and years and years, so whatever you do, if you ever get mad at Iraq, don't go in there and try to occupy it. Because you're going to be caught between the Shiites, the Sunnis, and the Kurds. And if we go in, we're going to be infidels, which means we ain't going to be like any of them. But we went. We put our bravest, our patriots on the line. And to this day, we're in Iraq. To this day, we're helping them build a constitution trying to come up with some compromise between three different peoples in one country that have a 3,000-year warring history. They don't want it. The Shiites are now saying they wish we'd hurry up and get out of there. Sistani, the Ayatollah of Iraq, he's saying either hurry up and get out of here or declare when you're going to get out, or I'm going to start leading protests. And folks, all they want is us to hurry up and get out of there, and they're going to deal summarily with the Sunnis. Because, for 35 years, the Sunnis dealt with them rather harshly. We went one country too far. We're there now. We're doing good there. Will it last? No. Can we quit and just leave? No. No more than we could just quit and leave in Vietnam until finally it became such a liability that we had no choice except to take the shame. We're in a quagmire. And the war after the war, which I warned against, is almost now in full swing. Democrats using that war against Republicans have made all the difference in the world in shaping public opinion. But I'm going to get to the next chapter. We did go a country too far. But what you don't know is who really set us up to be in it. Going back, looking at the war in Iraq, realizing, of course, that we're into a mess that seems to have no ending, one has to ask, how could the Bush administration, even with its propensity to want to get those markets back for the oil companies, how could they have been suckered in to such an incredible mess? Well, folks, it all lays not at George Bush's hands. It's not what he did to mislead the Congress, to mislead the country, to go to war. No president has that kind of information. It goes back to where the blame must be placed. Who are the people that gave this president, our Congress, and the world the information to start this war? And folks, maybe nobody else will tell you, but I will. It all lay squarely at the feet of one man named George Tenet. He said, well, Larry, what on earth could make a man sitting at the high position as the head of the CIA betray a country, betray an administration, and get us in a war that maybe we shouldn't be in? To explain that, one has to know the history of George Tenet. George Tenet was appointed by Bill Clinton to be the head of the CIA. That everybody knows. But most of you don't understand the real Clintons. You don't understand what they do to get and obtain power. And you certainly don't understand what one has to do to get to be in their inner circle. Enough about them. We'll talk about that later. But let's go to George Tenet. But before we look at Mr. Tenet at the head of the CIA, let's just take a little trip down memory lane where he came from. You see, there was a man, he was a senator from Oklahoma, David Boren. He had been there for a long time. He was governor of Oklahoma, later went on to Congress, and there he served as the powerful head of the Select Committee on Intelligence for the United States Senate. As a matter of fact, he was the longest serving head of that committee. Mr. Boren had a problem, and it was about to come out. See, so says pages that worked for him when he was governor, all the way to people that worked in his staff when he was with the Senate, that our Honorable Senator Bourne seemed to be, from all things that have come out since, a homosexual. And you say, well, but that's a hard thing to prove. Well, let's let his actions deal with that. In 1993, it started coming out. It started becoming very pervasive. Now, Mr. Bourne had a little bit of a problem. And there were people like Scott Thompson, a Rhodes Scholar, that was in Oxford with Bourne, that actually did a book. And he tells vividly, as did the Queer Nation, as did several homosexual magazines. They talked about David Bourne and his little problem. And it was starting to swell. And all of a sudden, in 94, David Bourne, a powerful senator, one can only suspect he would have just gone right back in, as he had done years and years and years before. But he knew something was about to hit him. He knew something was coming out. And so he chose in 94, in a surprise move that surprised all pundits, he decided, hey, I don't want to run anymore. And he quit. Now, folks, if Senator Bourne was a homosexual, albeit a closet homosexual, and if all the pages, these pages had no reason to make up stories about him finding them, Scott Thompson had no reason to out this man, albeit Thompson's a homosexual himself, even said that he didn't realize he was a homosexual until he had caught Bourne committing a homosexual act. And if you're not, if one's accusing you of being a homosexual and you're not, fight it. But if there are a bunch of people that will come forward and say it on the record and prove it, then you better cut and run. And that's what David Bourne did. But while he was on that committee, while he was the head of that committee, and a couple of the staffers talk about going to meet with David Bourne thinking it was going to be a career advancement, only to find out when they got with him, he'd take them to his apartment, serve cocktails, get them a little liquored, and then all of a sudden, he'd start moving in on them. Now, folks, I'm not going to describe here in vivid detail what one man does to another, but I think you can imagine it ain't right. But he did, and people are willing to testify to that. Well, then, I'm always amazed. You know, we always hear everybody being chauvinistic, males being chauvinistic. And as women try to gain and climb in companies and in politics, everybody always says, well, it's not who you about women being willing to do sexual things to advance their career. We've all heard it. Some accept it. But what's amazing to me is, why do we believe that men with the same lust for power wouldn't do the same thing women would do? I mean, what is it that makes us think people that rise to power, if they had to do a little homosexual thing to get where they want to go that would secure their career, why do we think men would not do that? Well, David Bourne had a staffer. Fairly smart, seemed to be. But other staffers will say he took an extreme course to getting to the top. Shall we say he rose above everybody else to get his position. And when you know Bourne's history, and when you know about others that simply wanted to grow and to become powerful or to get a higher job, we know what they went through. So here comes George Tenet. And he just scoots on past everybody else. And then, as David Bourne's leaving, he goes to Clinton, another Rhodes Scholar, who was at Oxford on and around about the same time, that, hey, this is who you should put over the CIA, a guy named George Tenet. Now, many in the CIA protested. The CIA is not exactly the kind of operation that you want to just bring somebody from the outside and put over. I mean, you have to understand the CIA from the inside to be a good leader. But Bill Clinton chose George Tenet. And Tenet came from David Bourne's staff. And albeit, remember, others in his staff to advance, they had to go through the Bourne test in his apartment with cocktails. So it makes you wonder, is George Tenet a homosexual? Now, somebody that's a homosexual, does that mean they're homosexual all the time? Does that mean they're bisexual? Here in the South, you ride a bull once, you're always going to be a cowboy. Does that mean that somebody could go to Bourne's apartment and do whatever you got to do to get to the next level? Would that be considered homosexual? And then, of course, your strong defense is, I've got a wife, I've got kids. Well, there's a lot of bisexuals that have wives and have kids. Matter of fact, there's a lot of wives that wake up one day and find out their hubby was actually a homosexual and they didn't even know it for years. I guess that's why they call it coming out of the closet. So David Bourne selects George Tenet and puts George Tenet through Bill Clinton over the CIA. Now, in my days with the Clintons, we had a rule. If you're going to let somebody in your inner circle, you don't want them to be clean. Remember, ain't nobody clean. We need something to hold over them. And that way we don't have to fear loyalty. It's only important that they know what they've done or what they are, and that we would know what they've done and what they are. And if they ever choose to cross us, that this stuff over them would come out. So if you understand David Bourne and his problems, seemingly with homosexuality, then you understand George Tenet, who came up through this organization through Bourne, that seemed to be connected to what somebody will do to get where they need to go. Then one can understand that by the time Bourne took Tenet to Clinton, Clinton had found him somebody that he could put over the CIA that would do exactly what he said. And if the CIA found out that Bill Clinton had a woman, he'd shut it down. If they found out Bill Clinton was getting money from North Korea or China to run his campaigns, they'd shut it down. And so you got George Tenet. George Tenet, to even the most liberal, conservative, or whatever you are. Now that you know the history of Tenet through David Bourne, and especially the knack the Clintons had for finding people that they could hold stuff over their heads, now you should see we've got a problem. and George Tenet. And that's why I tried to warn Bush. Rename Texas. Adopt another state. But never, ever keep a Clinton inner circle person in your system. Because their loyalties never will change. You see, I doubt Bush. I doubt George Bush, if you went to him today and said, well, what about Tenet? I doubt President Bush would tell you what I've told you. Matter of fact, he might not country to be in that the president wouldn't know something as stupid as what I'm telling you, but apparently he must not have known, or certainly he did not believe it. But I say George Tenet is the reason we went one country too far. What's his homosexual, heterosexual tendencies got to do with that? Has to do with his loyalty. Well, what's his loyalty originally to the Clintons got to do with the war in Iraq when the Clintons weren't even there? Folks, it's got to do with the Clintons' desire for power. You see, it didn't end when Bill left the White House. And those of us that have known them, have known, knew that it was just a matter of time until they bring Hillary in. If you don't believe me, ask Al Gore. If you don't believe me that there's a serious movement from the Clintons to get Hillary president, ask John Kerry. Isn't that odd? Gore was his vice president. Kerry was a Democrat. Clinton ostensibly went around and spoke for him. Isn't it an oddity that when both of those guys lose, they don't ever want anything to do with the Clintons again? Because you know what? They figured it out. They got had. They were used. Bill Clinton didn't want Al Gore to take over president after him. He didn't. 2 reasons. Clinton knew that they had falsely propped this economy up with the dot-com generation. He knew that our economy was as bogus as could be. And he knew when he left, it was going to crash, which meant the next president was going to inherit it. Well, the next president could not be his vice president because Gore would have inherited it, and it would have been a Clinton-Gore fiasco. They needed a Republican to win. They needed a maybe not too smart Republican to win, because it was going to come down around their knees. Once again, I went public telling Bush, you got the first 100 days of your administration. That's when you're not held accountable for what happened in the last administration. I begged George Bush, Karl Rove, I begged all of them. I said, declare the economy in the tank. We knew it was in the tank. It was going to come down. But no. But then it came down. And then Hillary was to let Bush run 1 term, and then she was to come in. And she would have been drafted. But we knew about it. We knew about it, and we told. And everywhere she went, there was a mic sticking in front of her, will you accept the draft? And then there was another problem, 9/11. Albeit that it came because of George Tenet and Bill Clinton's desire to keep the truth about the Clintons covered up. That's what facilitated 9/11, even to the point of able danger, where we could have stopped it or certainly delayed it or at least caused a hiccup. It couldn't be told because it would have exposed a situation where Clinton was using the military to spy on people that are here legally, which would have been in violation of posse comitatus, which they had already violated in Waco. A comedy of errors that didn't mean a thing to anybody but the Clintons. Cover up, facilitate for the future. But then it climaxed with 9/11. And then the Clintons saw something that they never dreamed possible. Bush got out there and got his legs under him. He got his legs. The American people rallied. And he went into Iraq, and he did a good thing. And he took the war to the terrorists. which was to ensure George Bush would be president for two more term or another term after the one he was in, and he would be deified like Reagan. Something the Clintons couldn't stand. But they knew something. George Tenet knew. They knew that Cheney, Wolfowitz, they wanted to get that money back for those oil companies in those markets they lost. And I say to you here today, George Tenet used that. He did that to protect his boss, the Clintons, and to facilitate creating something that would take George Bush one country too far, get him in a quagmire that would be certain to doom his administration. And he knew that they couldn't talk about it because he knew that Cheney, Wolfowitz, maybe George Bush himself, I can't say, but he knew that they were desirous of taking care of the oil companies in those markets they had lost. So, folks, we went one country too far because of one man, George Tenet. And because he did it because of one couple, the Clintons. And no matter how many lives are lost, ours, Iraqis, whomever, you remember this day. Those people died not to get oil for the oil companies. They died to fulfill the political agenda of the Clintons.